As more and more begin to know, the status quo has got to go. They're bound to say yes to a man named Dr. No, a man who makes the establishment panic. Grassroots are growing way too wild, too organic.
The big news on Tuesday is that Russia hawk, notorious Russia hawk, Victoria Nuland, is resigning from the State Department. So Victoria Nuland, who is most known for her role in the 2014 coup in Ukraine, will be retiring from the State Department in the coming weeks. And Secretary of State Antony Blinken announced this on Tuesday. So Nuland has worked as the Undersecretary of State for Political Affairs since 2021, which is considered the third highest spot in the State Department. And she served as the acting Deputy Secretary of State for a few months until the position was filled by Kurt Campbell, who's a China hawk. He's known very well as one of the most hawkish on China in the administration. Fortunately, they can't ever put any kind of non-hawk in these positions, but Nuland is the wife of Robert Kagan, who's one of the most influential American neoconservatives. He was part of the Project for a New American Century, the group of neocons credited with, hatching the plan for the invasion of Iraq. And Nuland has worked through multiple administrations. She was in the George W. Bush administration. She was actually a deputy foreign policy advisor to Dick Cheney from 2003 to 2005. So that means during the invasion of Iraq, she was a foreign policy advisor to Dick Cheney. So this is who we're dealing with here. And later she served as the U.S. representative to NATO in the Bush administration. In the Obama administration, Nuland worked as a State Department spokeswoman and then as an assistant Secretary of State for European and Eurasian affairs. And that's where she supported the Maidan protests in Ukraine in 2013 and into 2014, which led to the overthrow of former President Viktor Yanukovych. And the most notorious thing about this is the leaked phone call between Nuland and Jeffrey Pyatt, who was the U.S. ambassador to Ukraine at the time. And they're discussing who should be in the next Ukrainian government. Openly, well, not openly, it was a private phone call, I guess, but this was leaked, a damning piece of evidence of the U.S. meddling in that uprising and coup. And she's also, would show up to the protests. In one case, she handed out cookies. I mean, she was really the face of the U.S. regime change effort in Ukraine and the proxy war that has followed. She really is the face of it. There's a lot to say about Nuland. I don't want to spend a crazy amount of time on her, but she is responsible for some of the most reckless rhetoric during this whole thing. She threatened the Nord Stream pipelines before the Russian invasion. She said that the U.S. supports, Ukrainian attacks on Crimea, lots of things. The latest thing I saw, she was on CNN recently and said that the U.S. is going to tighten the noose on Putin, and again, despite the reality on the ground on what's happening in Ukraine, that Ukraine is clearly losing this war, and Russia's military has just gotten bigger. So Nuland will be replaced by John Bass temporarily until they nominate someone. So John Bass is another career U.S. government official. I never heard of him. I saw Aaron Mate on Twitter pointing out that he also worked for Dick Cheney at one point in his career, and I looked at his biography on the State Department's website, and that's true. He worked on the staff of former Vice President Dick Cheney. So another neocon, it looks like, is going to be the acting official in this position for now. So this article is from Kyle Anzalone. And a few days after U.S. and Haitian diplomats discussed sending U.S. special forces to Haiti to help Prime Minister Ariel Henry regain control over the capital city, a White House official dismissed the idea of deploying soldiers to the Caribbean nation. According to McClatchy, D.C., U.S. and Haitian diplomats held frantic conversations late last week that raised the prospect of an emergency deployment of U.S. special forces. On Monday, the outlet reported speaking with a White House National Security Council official who dismissed the possibility. So the U.S. is saying that they're not sending troops, but they are calling for this deployment. They want Kenya to lead an intervention force, a police force, into Haiti. So they want an intervention in Haiti. They don't want to send U.S. troops, I think, just because for PR purposes, the dark history of Western involvement. They want to send an African force over there. And things have really, for Henry, the prime minister, I'm not even sure if he's in Haiti right now. I know he was in Kenya when things started to really pop off. You have these gangs fighting, and then there's also this one group led by a guy named Jimmy Cherizer, who is also known as Barbecue. That's his nickname. And I know Dan Cohen, who is a journalist who covers Haiti a lot, and he says the characterization of Barbecue, I'm going to call him that because I might be butchering his last name. he is more of kind of leading an uprising against the government more than just being a gang leader. There are other gangs, criminal gangs, but his is more about an uprising against this government. And Henry came into power when the previous prime minister, Jovenel Moïse, was assassinated, and he's just been in power ever since. So he wasn't elected, and he doesn't have popular support. So that's a big factor here. And just the U.S. has just got to stay out of Haiti's business. The West has got to stay out of Haiti's business. The UN has to stay out of it. It's just not going to... that thing I covered yesterday, the Gray Zone report that revealed the CIA involvement in the 2004 coup in Haiti. This goes back and back and back.
Here's Gerald Salenti with today's trends in the news.
This is the big news. The pop star Taylor Swift told her fans Tuesday morning to participate in the Super Tuesday Republican and Democratic primaries across the country. Quote, "I want to remind you guys to vote the people who most represent you in power." Why, you said remind you guys. How about the transgenders? What's wrong with his and he and she and her? And I cut off my tits and my balls. Why, you said guys. I think we should condemn Taylor Swift. But what a bunch of shit. I could give a fuck what she says. Yep. If you haven't already, make a plan to vote today. Vote for your repulsive-kin. Vote for your Democrat. Vote for the same fucking pieces of shit who steal our money and give it to the bigs, who steal our money and give it to the military-industrial complex, who tax the shit out of us. Don't forget to vote. Don't forget to vote. How fucking stupid could you be to vote for this shit? But here's what's really important, what's going on. It's one of your top trends, one of the top trends for 2024, and that's banks go bust. And we're starting to see that happen now. It's in your economic update. Get ready, banks go bust. With people being forced to work from home, many of the businesses that depended on commuters have gone out of business or are going bust. With the U.S. office vacancy rate at some 20%, is a clear illustration for all to see the devastation caused by the idiotic, arrogant, narcissistic, sociopathic politicians who impose these draconian lockdown mandates without a scintilla of scientific data to legitimize the actions. We're talking about the COVID war. As of February, according to Investopedia, the commercial mortgage delinquency rate increased 59% in the past year. You ready? Yesterday, Spectrum News in New York 1, reported, quote, "The delinquency rate for office buildings in New York City has increased more than 1,000% from January 2023 to January 2024. The office vacancy rate in New York City, meaning no one in the place is empty, according to Cushman Wakefield, is nearly 23%. So again, we warned you about the office building bust when they started locking things down. It was one of our top trends. And we warned you about the banks going bust. There's going to be defaults like you can't believe, and the death of the dollar is going to happen when they lower interest rates to artificially prop this up. The lower interest rates go, the deeper the dollar falls, and the higher gold prices rise, which are now at $2,125 as we go on the air. And what is one of your top trends for 2024? Take a look at it. It's all about gold, or one of them. Golden year for gold. CIA, U.S. Special Forces are in Ukraine advising Ukrainians. That's a report that came out. That's old news in your Trends Journal when we reported that they were saying that the United States was sending in advisors. What advisors? Showing them how to shoot these weapons. Again, we are on the cusp of something very big. Gold prices are going up for two reasons. The first one is they're going to lower interest rates. As we had forecast, in the run-up to the presidential reality show. They're going to keep the clowns in charge, or they're going to try to, of course, because Janet Misfacia Bruta Yellen, the former Fed head, is now the Treasury Secretary running the fucking government, basically. You know, whoever got the money is running the show. They want to keep her there. And the other reason gold prices are going up is because intelligent people, those who read the Trends Journal and tune into our podcasts, know that, again, as interest rates go down with 70%, according to the CME data, the big guess is that 70% say they're going to be lowering by June. We believe earlier. The lower interest rates go, the deeper the dollar sinks. The deeper the dollar sinks, the death of the dollar, the higher gold prices go up. It's as simple as that, because gold is dollar based. So now with the dollar going down, it's cheaper for people to buy gold around the world. And you're seeing it, prices or buying escalating in China and with central banks. And oil prices, that is still hanging in the $83 a barrel, $82.50 for Brent crude. But with Israel ramping up the war, and they say they're going to keep doing it. They killed a couple of Iranian commanders. Could you imagine if Iran killed some IDF commanders? Oh my God, how terrible. And that's the way they feel in Iran. And they're ramping it up in Lebanon against Hezbollah. Oh, you mean the militant group? You mean the people the men that fought to get Israel out of Lebanon when they occupied it and killing people? Yeah, that Hezbollah. And they're ramping it up against Syria. So if war breaks out between military confrontation between Iran, Israel, and the United States, you're going to see oil prices, Brent crude, go to $130 plus a barrel. And that's going to kill the equity markets and the global economy.
You run your mouth and I run my business, brother. You tell everybody I'm busted. You talk so much you got me disgusted. But you run your mouth and I run my business, brother.
EVs emit more particulates, one of the most dangerous pollutants. Now, is that more overall carbon? Is that more overall pollution? I'm not 100% sure, but let's give this guy a read and let's go full screen so that you fine people can see it as well. California calls electric cars zero-emission vehicles because they don't have tailpipes. That is deceptive. Generating the electricity that powers those cars creates a particular pollution, and of course, electric cars still use tires, which are made from petroleum. Electric cars weigh far more than gasoline-powered ones, so their tires degrade faster, as electric car buyers are learning. The same analytics firm cited earlier compared two cars, a plug-in electric and a hybrid. The electric car weighed about 1/3 more than the hybrid and emitted roughly 1/4 more particulate matter because of tire wear. Total direct emissions went up, not down, when the electric car was driven. But when California's air agency analyzed the effect of its ban, it used a model that assumes both kinds of cars have the same tire wear. When the public pointed out the error, the agency doubled down, claiming it would be speculative to assume that electric cars will continue to be heavier than gasoline cars. The agency mused that in the future, automakers could probably offset the weight of heavy batteries with unspecified weight reduction in other components or the vehicle body. What's speculative is assuming that electric cars will soon weigh the same as gasoline cars they replace. Electric cars are 15 to 30% heavier because batteries store far less energy per pound than liquid fuels, while weight differences between electric and gasoline cars have remained roughly constant over the past decade. The only reasonable prediction of trends is for electric cars to get heavier as manufacturers increase battery size to boost range. All right, what do we got next? What do we got next here, producer man? The article is nearly half of all young voters won't pay more than $10 per month to fight climate change, creating potential issues for President Biden campaigning on the existential threat. Basically, what the article is saying is that people don't really buy the global warming thing, or if they do buy the global warming thing and they have to actually contribute just $10 of their own money out of pocket, they're not interested. And wouldn't that be the better way? Is just to, instead of creating legislations that secretly make your car more expensive, they secretly make your oven more expensive, they make your heating bill more expensive. They already secretly rob us through inflation all the time. But you never even see the price of, when they create that one new legislation, and now you got to buy the gas only from this company, or even look at the Russia war. Would our gasoline prices be less if we could still be buying if all that natural gas was floating? Well, according to Gene Epstein, no, because it just gets bought up by India anyways. So you know what? We can reject that one last point. Everything else I was saying would still make sense. Think about how you probably lose more than $10 a month. I think we can all agree on that because of random government legislation. How much has oil increased in cost because Biden took unfavorable positions to the industry, and so there was less investment in, for example, even just the Keystone Pipeline. And it seems to me, I guess with all of your, hey, global warming, it's coming to get all of us. We're all going to be dead in 3 months. Well, apparently not enough people are buying the story, because if you ask them to contribute just $10 a month in order to make sure that the world doesn't die from overheating, they don't care. That's the price at which they check out. Another thought on this, and, a lot of people, they'll go, well, what is Israel supposed to do? Or these people, they hate Israel, or, the people in Gaza, or after they've done all this to Gaza, how can they possibly have peace with Gaza? And I'd like to point out that I have yet to go over to Germany and try and kill Germans. I've never once thought about going over to Germany to be vengeful towards Germans. I've sat down with people who survived horrible things in the Holocaust. I've never listened to their story and went, I got to get over in there and I got to do something. And you want to know why? Because Nazis have no impact on my life. And so the fact is, I'm able to live a pretty good life right now. And so I don't look at the current Germans living in Germany and going, my God, what those people did to me, I have a blood debt. I have to get over there and I got to make sure to kill some Germans. I've never once had that thought in my entire life. You know why? Because I have no incentive to think that way. And so I'm thoroughly convinced that even in Gaza, people have moved on from hating each other for thousands of years, because you just realize you've got a financial incentive to get along. And so I don't think that there needs to be endless war over there. And I think the starting point is not starving the people of Gaza, because then you can at least start moving forward towards peace. If currently the only thing that those people can do is live in an area and die because that is what you're imposing on them, then yeah, you're not leaving them with too many choices other than to hate you and try and have vengeance. But, you start rebuilding, you start actually giving people some opportunity to live a normal life, and I think at the end of the day, that's all people really want. The coverage, though, like I said, it's always interesting to me why things are actually getting covered. This is from Reuters. Is there famine in Gaza? Here's what we know. It's not quite at famine levels. The reporting was basically, how close are we getting to that? And then, interestingly enough, Kamala Harris managed to get through a speech without laughing, and said sensible things, basically condemning Israel, and that the situation in Gaza is overly harsh. All right. Victoria Nuland, third highest ranking U.S. diplomat and critic of Russia's war in Ukraine, retiring. I got to hit up Gary Richide, our historian for the Run Your Mouth podcast, do maybe a segment called Shadow Creatures, because I think it would be great to actually take these people who have been behind the scenes the entire career and see what policy decisions these people are actually responsible for, and then tarnish their name so that when they go and they work at Columbia and they pretend like they're not absolutely moronic individuals who are just responsible for a legacy of bad decisions that led to chaos and death, maybe some kids will actually sit in the class and go, well, when you negotiated that deal and then, we fought for 3 years and then the war failed, do you feel any responsibility for the deaths and the fact that it did nothing that was in the U.S. best interest? What intelligence were you actually working on at the time when you decided that we could defeat Russia in that war? Wouldn't it be nice to actually just get all these deep state people behind the scenes, your Blinkens, your Kirbys, your this, your that, or if they never made a important policy decision or worked on an important project for their entire career, then you could just state what their career earnings were and the fact that they did nothing to actually earn all that money.
The largest government in history is so far away, so remote from the system described by people like James Madison, a government that had powers that would be few and defined, that it's like impossible to really quantify. So I think understanding how things got so bad, some of the main causes, is the first step on the road to recovery. And if you don't mind my pun, the path to liberty. So let's look at the top 5 today. And I want to start out with the word necessary. And Madison said in his opposition to the bank bill in February of 1791, he said, whatever meaning this clause may have, if they're going to debate what it means, none of them can be admitted that would give unlimited discretion to Congress. Basically, whatever Congress determines is necessary to carry out whatever it thinks is proper. Its meaning must, said Madison, according to the natural and obvious force of the terms and the context, be limited to means necessary to the end. It wasn't all caps, but he emphasized the word necessary and end, and incident to the nature of the specified powers, an incidental power. And Thomas Jefferson had a very similar take also in February of 1791, arguing against the first national bank, Alexander Hamilton's brainchild. And Jefferson said the Constitution allows only the means which are necessary, not those which are merely convenient. Now, Alexander Hamilton took the total opposite end of the spectrum, especially when he wanted to get a national bank going. And of course, we're still living with the pains of that today, and it's a far worse national bank than it was in 1791. And here's Hamilton. He said, necessary often means no more than needful, requisite, incidental, useful, or conducive to. I mean, if you've got kids and you tell them that something is is necessary for them to do, it's not a recommendation, it's not a suggestion, and that's how Hamilton is treating it here. He's telling us that necessary and proper somehow means conducive to. He's literally just making things up. He said it is a common mode of expression to say that it is necessary for a government or a person to do this or that thing, when nothing more is intended or understood than that the interests of the government or person require or will be promoted by doing this or that thing. So if it's necessary to do that, that means it's just convenient. It'll help it be more effective. And that's what Jefferson and Madison and many others were arguing against in 1791 and elsewhere. Next up, I want to talk about war powers under the Constitution. James Madison described it like this in Helvidius number 4. In no part of the Constitution is more wisdom to be found than in the clause which confides the question of war or peace to the legislature and not to the executive department. So to the father of the Constitution, he's telling us that the wisest part of the Constitution is separating the power to declare war and to wage war between the between the legislative and the executive, respectively. And if the father of the Constitution tells us that's the wisest part, maybe we should pay a little attention to it. James Madison explained why this is such a problem. I've got a couple of quotes here from his political observations, April 20th, 1795. And he felt, and so many others during the founding generation felt, that war was a huge threat to liberty. And he said, of all the enemies to public liberty, war is perhaps the most to be dreaded because it comprises and develops the germ of every other. War, he said, is the parent of armies. From these proceed debts and taxes. And armies and debts and taxes are the known instruments for bringing the many under the domination of the few. We have a trifecta, massive amounts of all three. And then if you even think about how we have this kind of de facto standing army in militarized federal agencies, a lot of them wouldn't be as militarized if it wasn't for, well, the empire having to gear up and have all this gear and capabilities to station itself in 100-plus countries around the world. So it's created an environment to add another standing army that the founders would have absolutely hated. So Madison warned that this was a very dangerous situation, and that is part of why he felt it was so important to separate this power of waging and declaring war between the executive and the legislature. And he points out why. He said the separation of the power of declaring war from that of conducting it is wisely contrived to exclude the danger of its being declared for the sake of its being conducted. We all understand what the founders understood, that the executive is the branch that is most prone to war. And so if it has the ability to make the decision on its own, like it has done for decades, without basically any input from Congress, or at best, Congress says, we authorize you to determine who, when, where, and how we're going to wage war, which is totally opposite of how they did it in the early days. And we were warned about Thomas Jefferson, of course, James Madison, warned us about turning the word necessary into something other than necessary. And of course, Alexander Hamilton did that. Unfortunately, George Washington went along with it, signed it. The Supreme Court under John Marshall reaffirmed it. And ever since, basically, government has decided whatever it considers convenient to its power is somehow necessary, even though it's only supposed to be necessary and proper. And then war powers, as Madison told us, would give us armies and debts and taxes, the known instruments for putting the many under the domination of the few. Well, I mean, no nation, Madison said, could preserve its freedom in the midst of continual warfare, and he called it there as well. But what helps fund all the garbage that they do, that they consider as necessary? Because if they said everything was necessary and they couldn't pay for it, or if they wanted to have all this warfare and they couldn't pay for it, well, they'd run into some problems. They'd have some natural limits. And that's why the Federal Reserve and its fiat funny money trash system that they have under the U.S. dollar, that fake money U.S. dollar, is the tool, the engine that powers the largest government in history. And I did an episode on that just this last month in February, Tyranny 101, how the Federal Reserve powers the monster state. And I encourage you to check that one out if you haven't yet, or if you just love hearing me talk about the same thing multiple times. That's a really good episode, going kind of a basic introduction into this. Now, that's not my wheelhouse, but I did my best, and I'm lucky to have some really good people doing some writing here that I'm able to work off of and learn from as I go. But fiat money, for the founding generation, that was only paper. Today, we'll have paper fiat money and the digital version eventually. And in essence, the fiat money of today, much of the inflation, and inflation is an increase in the money supply. The price increases is a result of that. Much of that inflation happening today is already digital, so we already know how much worse it can be. It's hard to get worse than trillions and trillions and trillions of debt. But anyways, here's how George Washington put it in a letter to Jabez Bowen in Rhode Island, Rhode Island was notorious for depreciating the value of a currency by printing way too much of it. And Washington put it this way: paper money has had the effect in your state that it ever will have, to ruin commerce, oppress the honest, and open a door to every species of fraud and injustice.
And Trump has his ups and downs and his personality, but if you're in politics, how can you do much criticism? You might, for social reasons, say, why does he have to make all that noise? But I would always hope that the negatives that he gets, maybe he could soften that. Now that he's now a gentleman and he can approach it. But I'm not expecting that to happen. Matter of fact, people would say, how do you think he got there? By being gentle?
Yeah, really.
But anyway, our goal is to try to describe and defend a position that means that we're going to have less government and more liberty. And he at least has been willing to talk to a few people on our side. He talked to my son,
that's
so
right.
that doesn't mean much has changed, but it's still something. What I think he does is, if politically it's advantageous, that's okay. But there's nothing wrong with that, because if it's politically advantageous not to be a warmonger, that's good. That's why some good will come of this. And right now there are other limitations that I talk about all the time, and that is the frustration with war, the loss of liberty, and the financial crisis we're in helps bring some of this mess to an end.
Yeah, let's put up this first clip. This is from the Wall Street Journal. This tells you that Nikki Haley to exit Republican presidential race. There's Nikki. She's going down. She won only 2 places, D.C. and Vermont. D.C., well, that wasn't probably a big win for her. We talked about it yesterday. That would have been a great commercial if it was closer. Trump could have put an ad in. And Vermont, we'll talk about that in a second, because there's some interesting statistics out of Vermont, the Vermont win. But I think the real lesson, and maybe we're just kind of glossing this a little bit, but why not, is that she's the most hawkish candidate that we've had in a long time. She is across the board. Any problem, shoot it. That's basically her philosophy, Kill it, finish it. Well, that's her philosophy. So I think the resounding rejection of Nikki Haley, now it was a number of things that didn't appeal to the American voter, but that was a big issue. She made that the center of her campaign. So I think the rejection of Nikki Haley is good news for us. It's also good news because it shows that the Romney wing of the party, the Rhino wing, the old school wing, the old reflexively neocon wing of the party, I think is on its back heels. And I think we're seeing that. We've talked about this on the show over and over. We're seeing the rise of folks who are, while not perfect, people like Vance, Green, Gates, and others. They're not perfectly anti-war. However, they're more populist. They're more attuned to, I think, the American national interest than the old guard, which is only attuned to the military-industrial complex. Now, again, we don't want to gloss it over, but overall, I think it's a good sign that this kind of populist anti-war movement in the party is on the ascendance. And as you said in your opening, Dr. Paul, if Trump is smart, he'll listen to the voters who reject Nikki and be the anti-Nikki. Yeah. A new Gallup poll came out today, and it's got pretty good news on it. Let's just, we'll just show the headline so you can see where it came from. This is Kyle Anzalone from the Libertarian Institute. Poll shows young Americans' support for Israel plummeting. Let's go to the next one and look at the tabs here. Changes in favorable ratings of Israel and the Palestinian Authority by age. Now you see, among people 18 to 34 years old, the favorable views toward Israel have plummeted from 64% favorable in 23 to only 38% favorable in 2024, a 26 percentage point drop in favorableness toward Israel among young people. And I think this was probably equally encouraging. Maybe I'm reading too much into it, Dr. Paul, but asking the same question for the 18 to 34-year-olds about whether they view the Palestinian Authority favorably, that has also dropped by 4 points. Now, not as dramatic. Maybe I'm misreading, but to me it almost looks like young people are saying, look, a pox on both of their houses. I'm not interested in Israel because they're dragging us into war. I'm not interested in the Palestinian Authority. I just don't care.
I make fun of what goes on, and I said, how do these wars start? Oh, well, it's easy. You get a bunch of teenagers out there having fun, and they say, things are boring tonight. Why don't we call across this state line or, international line? We'll go and see our friends and such and such other. Why don't we have a little war? We could have some fun. That's the way they act, but that is not the way it works. They don't do that. It's a bunch of connivers that we talk about all the time and try to point out who's doing this real planning. And there's so many guilty parties there, and the ones that have never voted against one nickel going to militarism, they can't be helpful to the American Republic.
As you were saying that, I kind of figured out why, because look at network television, it's a mental prison. Oh, I'm a Democrat, I like to watch Rachel. Oh, I'm a Republican, I want to put on Fox News. But like you were saying, with the internet revolution and people getting their news in different ways, I think people are thinking outside the box. I think you'll have fans of Tucker Carlson watching Glenn Greenwald. Oh my gosh, he's on the right, he's on the left. I think they're watching, people are watching the Judge Napolitano more than ever. They're crossing over these artificial lines of left or right, R or D.
Yeah,
And that's encouraging.
and it gets worse. And this comes from the concept of pure democracy. You have to get up to that 51%, not to protect your liberty, but to spend the money and control things. But you know, what we're seeing here, and the other thing that's always annoyed me is hyphenated Americans.
Yeah,
you know, well, yeah, they do. I think I've had people in my district that might be more farmers and others manufacturers, and they say, I remember once the media come out, how are you going to talk to the farmers and the manufacturers? How, because you'll have to change. Why should you do that? If liberty is important, it doesn't matter. Yeah. And the real diversity is individualism. Yeah. People allowed and not curtailed in doing what they want and owning their own property and having a say about who's going to march off to fight wars that are senseless. And that's what we have to have. And this whole thing that, we'll legislate some of this DEI and all this business, and all of a sudden we'll have diversity.
Yeah,
you know,
right.
That's not likely to happen that way.